The afternoon passed in a blur. At first, Natalie had difficulty believing they were inside an enormous intelligent tree called OQ, whose hollow branches and roots formed a labyrinth of passages and tunnels connecting the deepest organism or terminals to the highest leaf chambers filled with sunlight and sweet Earthhaven air. But by the time they reached a living chamber in the lower branches, where rainwater had collected to form an enchanted pool, she'd seen so many strange sights and been told so many strange things by Katherine, she'd hardly have been surprised if the tree had uprooted itself and walked across the clouds. It was as if her store of fear and wonder had been used up, and there was nothing left to be frightened of or amazed by. Their guide during this time was a young woman who wore orange flowers and berries in her hair. By the green light in her eyes, Natalie guessed she was a spell lady, even before Katherine informed her of the fact. Her name was Lady Thayperi, and the first thing she said to them was, "Don't worry, we're not all as grumpy as Lord Bavarian. You caught him at a bad time, I'm afraid. He's not used to people standing up to him, especially not people 1/100th of his age." Then she laughed, a warm earthy sound that immediately put Natalie at ease. Even Merlin seemed to relax a bit, and his mouse, which had fled under his sweater at the sight of her, wiggled out again to sit beneath his ear. Lady Thayperi dumped an armful of moss-green clothing beside the pool and smiled at them. "Here's towels and clean clothes," she said. "They belong to some of the herder children, so they should fit you all right. Little devils. They're always visiting OQ for a swim and leaving stuff behind, so they won't miss them. When you're done, just ask Katherine to give Kay Perry a call, and I'll come do your hair. Got to look your best when you appear before the council. Enjoy your swim." Finally, they were alone. Natalie felt her shoulders relax. With a sigh, she kicked off her shoes, sat on the edge, and dangled her feet in the water. While she and Merlin had been touring the tree, it had grown dark outside. Moonlight shone through OQ's interlaced branches, making silver-green reflections in the pool. The water was pleasantly warm, sliding around her ankles like Earthhaven was sliding around her thoughts. She closed her eyes. Then Katherine jumped in, drenching her and drawing a little scream from Merlin. She shook herself and looked around. "Come on, silly, it's only water." "It's magic," Merlin whispered, retreating even further. Natalie wanted to laugh, only she didn't have the energy. "You're the one who kept going on about spells. I believe you now." She looked fondly at Katherine, dog paddling under some vines at the far side of the pool. "Pup, swim now," said the mage hound in the special place in her head. She smiled. "In a minute, maybe. The spell lady didn't leave us any bathing suits." Puzzled amber eyes blinked at her. "Costumes would only get wet." She giggled, then became aware of Merlin watching her. He still looked frightened. Was he worried about meeting Lord Bavarian again? "I won't let the council hurt you," she promised. "When they hear the truth about your father and everything, they'll understand." Merlin hugged his mouse. "They hate me," he whispered. "And the tree hates me too, I can feel it. The old lord's got it in for me, I know he has. He's only waiting for an excuse. He gave you back your mouse, didn't he?" "He wouldn't have if you hadn't been there." "Well, I am here, aren't I? So cheer up. We'll have a nice swim and maybe something to eat. Then we'll talk to this council of theirs. They'll help us, don't worry. Then they'll let us go home." As soon as the words were out, she mentally kicked herself and added quickly, "You can come home with me, and you'll be safe there." Merlin shook his head, ripples of moonlight playing across his face. "I'll never be safe from my father. He'll be furious I helped you get away. He'll come after me, and then he'll... He choked and clutched his mouse. "Mouse Pup's sad," Katherine reported. "Lost mother, too." Natalie frowned, remembering what Merlin had said about Claudia not being his mother. "What happened to your mother, Merlin?" she asked gently. He came forward a few steps, carefully not to get too close to the edge, and stared across the pool. "It was Father's fault. He only meant it as a punishment, but something went wrong. She tried to take me away from him. See? I don't really remember that part. I was just a baby, but I know what happened after, all right. She had a sweet little canary for a familiar. It used to sing all the time. Father clipped off one of its toes, just to hurt my mother's foot a bit, to teach her a lesson for running off. But the canary died of shock." His voice broke. Natalie stared at him, wondering if she'd heard right. He sniffed and went on. "Afterward, she took a train to the coast and walked off a high cliff. They found her body on the rocks a week later. Father said if I told a soul what had happened, or disobeyed him even a little bit, he'd punish me the same way by hurting Red Eye. Only he'd keep me locked in the cellar afterward so I couldn't escape like she did. That's why I tripped you up in the parking lot and did all those other things. I had to." He dragged his sleeve across his nose. Natalie sat very still. Katherine jumped out of the pool, shook the water from his coat, and laid his head on her shoulder. He whined in sympathy. "That's awful," she said. "Even worse than what happened to mine. The police said my mother's death was an accident, that she fell in the river because she was blind. Dad told me Katherine had drowned too, but there was a flood so they didn't find the dog's body. I believed him." She fondled the mage hound's tattered ear. "If only I'd known the truth. Your mother was a spell lady, wasn't she? Father said something about her death when we got back to the lodge with your spider. but I had no idea who she was then. The Lady Achinaki, Natalie said with a surge of pride. And now I think I know why she died. It was the first day of November when she drowned, the night before the boundary would have been open, and she'd been able to see. I think she saw something that night, Merlin. Katsunaki says they were on their way to Earthhaven when it happened, but some men came out of nowhere and pushed her into the river. He jumped in and tried to save her, but she sent him back to Earthhaven to warn the council. He doesn't know what was so important. I get these flashes of a black bird flying. I thought it was your father's hawk at first, except Hunter's not black all over. She frowned. Along with everything else the Mage Hound had told her since he first spoke to her at the Thrallstone, the truth about her mother's death was almost too much to handle. She needed more time to sort it all out. Merlin, however, was staring at her. "A raven?" he whispered. "What?" "When we started the fire in the lodge, Father said something about a raven in the cellar, didn't he? I'd forgotten that." She closed her eyes, trying to recall the image Katsunaki had shown her. Could it be someone's familiar? Merlin shook his head. No, Hunter ate them all. Maybe the council will know. The boy crept closer. Hesitantly, he touched her arm. "I'm sorry about your mother, and I'm sorry about yours." There was an embarrassed silence. Then Katsunaki pushed his wet body between them and flapped his ear. "Pup swim now! Kea Paris says better hurry! Council not like to be kept waiting." Natalie passed on this message with a smile. She stripped off her 2 sweatshirts and her jeans and eased herself into the water, careful not to splash her glasses. It was wonderfully warm. She rolled onto her back and kicked lazily. There was a loud splash as the old Mage Hound joined her. She laughed and grabbed his ruff, letting him pull her across the pool beneath the hanging vines at the far side. There seemed to be some kind of fruit over there, like large golden pears hanging temptingly just above the water. "Are they poisonous, Katsunaki?" she asked. "Soul fruit not poisonous, Soultree friends," the Mage Hound said cryptically. "No, Natalie!" Merlin didn't even hold his nose but took a running leap that turned into the most painful belly flop she'd ever seen. She smothered a giggle as he surfaced and started to dog paddle like Katsunaki, but not really as effectively. He kept sinking, then surfacing again to sputter. "No, don't eat it! Natalie! Help!" His cries became more frantic, his splashing wilder. She frowned, reluctantly to leave the soul fruit. "Natalie!" This time he disappeared under the surface, and didn't come up again. "Merlin, quit fooling around!" Heart thumping, she swam across, Katsunaki paddling after her. "Mousepup's stupid!" the Mage Hound said. She was inclined to agree, but fear for Merlin kept her from replying. She stared down through the silver-green water and saw his hair floating beneath her feet like red seaweed. Her stomach clenched. "Help him, someone!" she shouted. "He's drowning! Lady Thayperry! Lord Bavarian, anyone help!" Snatching off her glasses, she threw them toward the edge and prepared to dive. Katsunaki caught them gently in his mouth. "Pup's so silly! Ask OQ for shallow water. Remember to say please this time." "But," then she understood. Grabbing the nearest vine, she yelled, "Shallow water, please, OQ!" A great wave nearly knocked her over. She clung onto the vine for balance, afraid the tree had decided to take revenge for her calling it stupid when she rescued Tim. Then suddenly, she was kneeling in water that barely covered her thighs, and Merlin lay before her, coughing and sputtering like a beached fish. Katsunaki nosed him. "Mousepup will live," he said, sounding pleased with himself. Natalie stood shakily and addressed the interlaced branches overhead. "Thank you, OQ." The leaves rustled. "How can you thank it?" Merlin hugged his bony chest. "It tried to kill me." She frowned. "I don't think so. It grabbed my leg and pulled me down." "I didn't see anything." "You're bound to say that. Your mother was on the council," Katsunaki growled. "Mousepup imagined things. Mousepup can't swim." "Is that true?" Natalie looked at the shivering boy with new respect. He jumped in for her sake. "Is what true? That you can't swim? Didn't you realize how deep it was?" His red face told her all she needed to know. She fought a smile. "Don't laugh at me!" He scrambled out of the pool and retrieved his mouse from the branch where it had taken refuge when he had jumped in. "Everyone laughs at me. I can't do anything right. I'm just a joke. A stupid joke." Tears glittered in his eyes. "I'm not laughing at you, silly. It's just that no one has ever drowned themselves for me before. I bet you couldn't even see what you were doing after Red Eye bailed out. What was it like? Watching yourself go under?" Merlin sniffed, and his lips twitched into a small smile. "Scary." Natalie couldn't help but giggle as she squeezed the water out of her hair. The swim had made her feel almost normal again. "We better get ready, I suppose. I hope this council doesn't take too long, because the smell of that soul fruit has reminded me of how hungry I am. I'm even beginning to regret throwing my spaghetti and meatballs over you." "Yeah, that was stupid," Merlin agreed. "If you didn't want it, you could have given it to me."